Remember the old days when Syfy was Sci-Fi Channel as an actual science fiction, and they had a lot of space opera stuff? Well, it looks like happy days are here again. The Expanse is developed by Mark Fergus and Huck Otsby, who run the show along with Naren Shakar, and it is based on a series of novels by James S.A. Corey, which is actually a pen name for two different writers that write the books together. The series takes place in the 23rd century, in which humanity has started colonizing out in the solar system. We have people on Mars, we have people out in the asteroid belt, and there is some unrest out there, especially in the asteroid belt, where there's a bunch of people that want to rebel and form their own independent state separate from Earth and the United Nations. All it takes is potentially one spark to set the whole thing off into chaos. Similar to Game of Thrones, this series has a big, epic scope. Really big, so big that it takes multiple points of view, multiple characters to kind of tell the full story. In this case, there are three main protagonists. The first one is James Holden, played by Stephen Strait. He is the XO of an ice freighter called the Canterbury, in which he and his crew go out and mine ice. Well, one day they come across a distress call from a ship called the Scopuli, and when they go to investigate, they find it's completely empty. They find that it was probably attacked by another ship, and just when they think they've seen everything on the ship, they get attacked again by the same ship that presumably attacked the Scopuli, and thus are thrust into a survival spacefaring adventure while also trying to get to the bottom of this mystery that they've just stumbled upon. The second point of view is more of a noir detective story following Detective Joe Miller, played by Thomas Jane. He is a corporate detective on a colony called Ceres, which is out in the asteroid belt. And Ceres is essentially corporate run. Like, he's not a state detective. He doesn't get paid by people's taxes or anything. He gets paid by a private company. And he is given the case about a disappearance of a rich girl by the name of Julie Mao, who just happens to be one of the main crew members on board the Scopuli. So, see how it all connects? He's tasked with finding her, and in the process of doing so, he goes deep down into the underground of Ceres, underground into the OPA, which is the name of the resistance organization that wants to rebel against the UN, the main government, and becomes their own independent state in the asteroid belt. And as he goes deep into his detective work, he will discover a conspiracy that goes beyond the wildest imaginations of anyone. And the third main character is Christian Avasarala, played by Shure Agdashlu. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's on screen right there, so correct me in the comments. She is the UN Deputy Undersecretary of Executive Administration, so she works really high in the government. She lives on Earth, so whereas we get space, we get a crummy asteroid colony, and then we get Earth, which looks freaking great. It's all gorgeous and futuristic looking, but in a believable sort of way. It's a future you can believe in. Anyway, her role in the series is essentially to give exposition to the audience. Her place in the show is to kind of give the audience a scope. The scope of how big this whole thing is. Show the political implications of everything that's going on. I'll get more on her later. The visual effects are some of the best you will ever see on television this season. The spaceships look great. Nothing ever really looks like a video game. The shots that show the spaceships don't look cheap. They look very well thought out. A lot of detail. Lots of detail with lighting and scratch marks and what the ships look like and everything. It's really cool to look at. That's a reason to watch the show right there. Really good visual effects. Second reason? Set design. Sets and props. Everything looks like it has a purpose. It doesn't look like future ship or shiny or crummy because drama future. No, everything looks very thought out. and with some really interesting ideas put in there. I mean, we are usually used to people with long control panels that have to fly the ship, but this series reimagined this as essentially a tablet that you just use to fly the ship, or at least the panel is the size of an iPad. People pull out these little, I think they're phones? I think that's what they are. They're phones. But like phones today, like these things, I mean, this thing can do all sorts of cool stuff, except these phones are more like transparent slabs of glass instead of like a glass screen with things behind it. But this is like all transparent with the image projected that you can just touch and do stuff. It even has like little cracks and scratches on it because, let's face it, many of us have dropped our iPhones and have scratched and sometimes cracked the screen on it. Another thing you will notice about The Expanse is that it's pretty steady in its pacing. Some could say slow. Now, I've watched TV shows that are very slow that have turned me off. This is not one of them, probably because of the effects and the sets. But this is a slower paced show. It's probably because it's based on a book, because each episode really does feel like a chapter in a novel. None of the episodes really stand out on their own. It doesn't have procedural type pacing or anything like that. It's very, here's what happens first, here's what happens next, here's what happens after that. Very similar to Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is paced very similar. It's slightly slower than Game of Thrones, at least right now, and that's probably because a lot of the big stuff that's supposed to happen hasn't quite happened yet. Same with the first season of Game of Thrones. War doesn't really break out until the end of the first season. I will say it might actually work better if you were to binge it via Blu-ray or whatever streaming service. It's not on Netflix yet because it just ended its first season, but watching multiples in a row as opposed to week by week by week, which is what I had to do. And there was a couple of times where I was like, all right, come on, let's get it going. But I knew what I was in for right off the bat, and I knew that it was going to get good, so I was patient with it. This is one of those shows that also has a mystery plot, which could be a bit of a red flag for some people, considering that mystery plots are usually a way to create intrigue for the show, but the writers don't actually know where this is going. Thankfully, this is based on a series of books, of which the mystery has already been figured out in that medium, so therefore, in this adaptation, yeah, the screenwriters already know where this is going, so by the end of it, it doesn't come off stupid. It doesn't come off like something they just pulled out of their ass to, come up with an answer. The show has a great cast that works very well together. I especially like the crew of the Canterbury, Holden's crew, Holden's group of people. There's just a nice rapport with one another. It's really enjoyable. The one character I do have an issue with is the Avasarala character in the UN. She's mostly there for exposition. She doesn't do a whole lot in this show. And I find myself sitting in my seat going, all right, come on, let's get through this, come on, I want to get back to Holden or Miller where the real exciting stuff is going on. And I think the big reason for that is because she wasn't actually in the first book. The first season of the show is mainly based on the first novel in the Expanse book series entitled Leviathan Wakes, and the Christian Avasarala character wasn't in that book. It was just focused on Miller and Holden. They added her character in the show in the very beginning of the show, that is. She appears later in the books, but she doesn't appear at first. She appears in the beginning of the show to give the audience, that sense of scope and how the political implications are going to play out and that kind of thing, which is great, but you can tell she's not being used to her full ability just yet. Not to mention some of the scenes in which exposition is given through her and other characters, in my opinion, could have been directed a little better. A couple of times there was some cool stuff to look at, like nice Earth City background or one really cool aquarium scene, but other times it's just simply a reverse shot with a really pretty background to, give off information, and it just didn't work for me. It made me feel like if I want this information, I'll get it later. Part of me wonders if this series would actually have been more entertaining for me if they just took her scenes out and followed exactly the book and kept her waiting until later. They didn't do that, so just warning you, when those scenes come, try to be attentive as possible. Maybe bring some coffee. But in terms of a big space opera epic, This is a TV show we've been waiting for a while. If you like TV that takes place in space, spaceship stuff, you know, we finally have that now. I mean, we've had fantasy with Game of Thrones, we have a whole bunch of horror with American Horror Story. Genre fiction has finally hit the mainstream on television. I mean, we have superheroes airing 4 nights a week now, and yet shows about spaceships kind of been thrown by the wayside. Until now, The Expanse is the answer to that, and it's a true return to form for Syfy Channel. Or, I should just call it Syfy. I still call it Syfy Channel from time to time, because that's what it used to be called. Because back then, when it was called the Syfy Channel, that's when they aired a lot of big space stuff, and then they changed their name. They didn't do space stuff that much. They canceled Stargate Universe, they canceled Caprica, the 2 shows I really liked, and which really pissed me off when they did that, and they started doing a whole bunch of reality show crap, but now this is their return to form, and thank you so much, Syfy, for having this show happen. Thank you for renewing it for a 2nd season. Yes, this is gonna come out again in 2017. I'm assuming January of 2017, and honestly, I can't wait. There's 10 episodes of this season. If you have a chance to check this out and you like space shows, space epics, and are okay with the steady pace that's surely going somewhere, and perhaps maybe you like the Expanse book series by James S.A. Corey, I would definitely check this show out. Thanks for watching my review of The Expanse Season 1, and I will see you next time.